All right, welcome back. We are picking up in chapter 8 of the book of Revelation as we look at the fulfillment of Revelation back in 70 Common Era. As I've said in the previous videos, I'm using a couple of books as a guide to put the video series together. The first one is The Mystery's History by Adam Driscoll, and the other's Back to the Future by Ralph Bass. They're both really good books. They work really well together if you or you want to take your time and work through a study of the book of Revelation. Of course, I am also putting my own spin on things, and I'm sure that my views don't reflect either one of the views of those authors, so they would probably disagree with some of the additions I'm making to this in this video, but they're both really good books. Okay, so if we look back on kind of setting up where we are here, chapter 6 ended with the question, who's able to stand before the wrath of the Lamb? And then chapter 7 revealed who is able to stand. We see the 144,000 of the tribes of Israel. We see this huge multitude coming out of the tribulation that's made up of every tribe and nation and tongue. And so now we see in Revelation chapter 8, first verse, the seventh seal is broken off this document. And as I mentioned in the other videos, in the ancient Near East, marriage contracts for kings and royalty were signed, or sealed rather, with 7 seals. And contained within that marriage covenant would be the terms of divorce. So the only reason that you would be breaking these 7 seals off of this marriage document would be if it's a divorce going on. And so here we have the 7th seal. The 7th seal would represent the conclusion of the divorce. And it says, and when the seal was opened, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. So now the earthly temple was designed to be a copy of a heavenly temple. And so it represents this temple in heaven. And in Josephus' Wars of the Jews, he mentions that prior to the rebellion, on the eighth day of Nisan, or Abib, in the spring, there was a great light that shone round about the altar in the holy house, that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted for half an hour. So both this, what's happening in the heavenly temple and what's happening on the earthly temple, involves something lasting for half an hour. Now, in the heavens said there was silence for half an hour, but on the earth there was this bright light shining in the temple for half an hour. So I tend to think these two are related. Also, one of the commentaries I read said that half an hour is about the time that it would take for the priest to go into the temple and offer incense. So, all of these kind of tie together in that respect. Also, I just want to mention that these plagues that we see occurring in Judea in the first century, they all are similar to the plagues that occurred in Egypt prior to the Exodus. And so there's this warning in Deuteronomy 28, and the destruction of Jerusalem is essentially the fulfillment of this warning. It says, if you do not guard to do all the words of the Torah that are written in this book, to fear the glorious and awesome name of Yahweh, your Elohim, then Yahweh shall bring upon you and your descendants extraordinary plagues, great and lasting plagues, and grievous and lasting sicknesses. And he shall bring back on you all the plagues of Egypt, of which you were afraid, and they shall cling to you. And also every sickness and every plague which is not written in the book of the Torah, Yahweh does bring upon you until you are destroyed. So this warning is literally being fulfilled in the first century. Now, in the previous chapters, we saw these 7 seals that would affect 1/4 of the land, and now the intensity is being cranked up a little bit. So the trumpets will affect 1/3 of the land. So we're going from 1/4 to 1/3, and coming up we have the bowls, and the bowls is going to be even more intense. And it's worth noting that the purpose of these plagues is to get the people to repent. And Revelation 9 is going to tell us that despite what was going on, they still did not repent. And I would even say that's true today. So essentially what we have going on is Yahweh had these two brides. We had the house of Israel and the house of Judah. God put away the house of Israel. And the king of Assyria came in, took the house of Israel captive, and they were taken out of the land. And they were brought over into the area that eventually became known as Parthia. And so then in the book of Jeremiah, we see God lamenting that Judah is even worse than Israel was, and that Israel at this point had repented, and God was calling for Israel to return. And so now we're in the book of Revelation, and God is formally divorcing Judah, and he is again calling for his first bride, Israel, to return to him. So, and that, I think that explains a lot of the animosity that we see between the Jews and the Anglo-Saxons. The white Europeans and Americans, they're the descendants of the house of Israel. And Judah now is this scorned wife, and of course, the scorned wife is going to hate the wife that's now with her ex-husband. And just this last week, Whoopi Goldberg, there's like this whole controversy because she said that Jews are white. And you really saw the hatred come out. On social media, there's screenshots going around of these Jews that are absolutely appalled and offended that Whoopi Goldberg called them white. And that's because the Jews hate the white race. And that's why you see the Jews working a lot of times to undermine white society. So you got this little meme on the page where it's connecting pornography, banking, the 1%, Hollywood, government, and media, but it goes beyond that. Abortion, radical feminism, this uncontrolled immigration, bringing in foreigners into our nation, not just America, but it's the same thing's going on in Europe. Racial unrest, vaccination mandates, communism, Kabbalah, all this stuff it's all run by this same group of people. And it's almost like whatever type of sinful or decadent industry that they can get involved in, they do. The slave trade was run not by, the whites are the ones that are blamed for it, but it was actually the Jews that were responsible for that. So that's kind of setting up, where we are coming into this chapter. So back to Revelation 8. And when he opened the seventh seal, there came to be silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw 7 messengers who stood before Elohim, and to them were given 7 trumpets. And another messenger came and stood at the altar, holding a golden censer. And much incense was given to him, that he should offer it with the prayers of the holy ones, upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the set-apart ones went up before Elohim from the hand of the messenger. So the first thing that we look at here is these 7 trumpets. Now, when you hear 7 trumpets, it should remind you of the fall of Jericho, where the Israelites were told to walk around Jericho every day for 7 days. And after they walked around Jericho the first day, they were to blow the trumpets 1 time, and each day they blew it 1 time after this procession around the city. And then on the seventh day, they blew the trumpet 7 times, and the walls of Jericho came down. So when you hear this reference to 7 trumpets, in your mind, you should be thinking, okay, Jericho. That means a city's about to fall. And so this other messenger came and stood at the altar holding a golden censer, and much incense was given to him that he should offer it with the prayers of the holy ones. And so the incense smoke ascending from the incense altar, that's what it represented in the temple, and that was something that was understood, that when the priest went into the temple on earth to offer the incense, he was actually offering up the prayers of the people of God. And so we saw earlier what these prayers were. The prayers of the saints, they were praying for vengeance to be delivered upon Jerusalem because of the persecution that they were getting from the Jews. And so we're going to see these prayers are about to be answered. One of the commentaries I read had this interesting comment, and it's something that provoked a little bit of thought for myself, so I'm going to share it with you. It said, the church is thus given a vivid picture of the power of prayer, and also of the necessity for praying for justice and judgment. The church is too often remiss in this central aspect of intercession. Its prayers are pietistic and humanistic, unconcerned with God's justice, and unduly concerned with escape rather than battle. And that's true. You know, I've done videos in the past about justice and righteousness, and that this understanding of justice and righteousness in the ancient Near East involved not only delivering the oppressed, but also punishing the oppressor. And, you know, how often do we, in our prayers, do we pray for this kind of justice, where God actually intervenes and delivers judgment and henceforth, you know, vengement or punishment to someone who's oppressing us or oppressing someone else? And then we also have this quote from Yeshua in Luke 18:7, and shall Elohim not do right by all means to his own chosen ones who are crying out day and night to him and being patient over them? I say to you that he shall do right to them speedily. But when the Son of Man comes, shall he find faith on the earth? So when we think about God's idea of justice, I mean, it involves punishing the oppressor, and that's exactly what these prayers were. And so this messenger took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth, and there were noises and thunders and lightnings and an earthquake. So now these prayers are about to be answered through fire from the holy altar. The prayers of the saints, they're going to return to the earth in wrath. Also mentioned there's some apocalyptic language here. Thunders and lightnings represent the tempest of war descending from the heavens to the political world or nation. And then the earthquake, as we've said before, is a shaking of kingdoms to distract or overthrow them. So both of those were in the chart from the introductory video to the series. And then we have Yeshua in Luke 12 saying, I came to send fire on the earth, and how I wish it was already kindled. So this is Yeshua actively delivering this judgment. It's not the Romans destroying Jerusalem. It is the Romans are nothing but a tool in the hand of Yeshua destroying Judea and vindicating his people. Speaking about the proper judgment for a city that is sinful, Deuteronomy 13, some of you may be familiar with the video, the Deuteronomy 13 test, talking about a false prophet. Well, this destruction of Jerusalem actually lines up with Deuteronomy 13. It says, when you hear of someone in your cities, which Yahweh your Elohim gives you to dwell in, saying, some men, sons of Belial, have gone out of your midst and led the inhabitants of their city astray, saying, let us go and serve other mighty ones whom you have not known. Then you shall inquire and seek out and ask diligently, and see if the matter is true and established, that this abomination was done in your midst. And you shall certainly smite the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, putting it under the ban, and all that is in it, and its livestock, with the edge of the sword, and gather all its plunder into the middle of the street, and completely burn with fire the city and all its plunder before Yahweh your Elohim. And it shall be a heap forever, never to be built again. So this concept of fire coming from heaven, we've seen it throughout Scripture. In the book of Leviticus, it is said to have lit the fire on the altar, that the fire burning within the temple itself came from heaven. We see it in a story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, where fire comes from heaven. In the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, those cities were burnt with heavenly fire. And in one of the commentaries I was reading, they actually stated that when this city's plunder was to be burned with fire, that it should be burned with fire from the altar. Now, I don't know if that's true. I would think they would just light the stuff on fire, but I just find it interesting that this person stated that. Revelation 8:6, and the 7 messengers who held the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound, and the first messenger sounded. And there came to be hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth. And 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So we'll see this repeated over and over, that it was 1/3 of the land that was affected. Hail and fire mixed with blood, that's reminiscent of the first plague in Egypt. Also, as far as the representation goes, the earth, according to our chart of apocalyptic language, the earth would represent the land of Israel and the people therein. Trees are men of high standing, and then the grass would be the common people. So it says 1/3 of the trees were burned up and all the green grass was burned up. That would be people that are being affected by this. So some commentary from Josephus. He says, "Nor did the Romans, out of the anger they bore at this attempt, leave off, either by day or night, burning the places in the plain, and stealing away the cattle that were in the country, and killing whatsoever appeared capable of hiding perpetually, and leading the weaker people as slaves into captivity, so that Galilee was all over filled with fire and blood, nor was it exempted from any kind of misery or calamity." So again, we see the hail mixed with fire and blood coming upon the earth, and then Josephus specifically describes Galilee as being filled with fire and blood. He goes on to say that Vespasian marched against the city of Gadara, and took it upon the first onset, because he found it destitute of any considerable number of men grown up and fit for war. He came then into it and slew all the youth, the Romans having no mercy on any age whatsoever. And this was done out of the hatred they bore the nation, and because of the iniquity they had been guilty of in their affair with Cestius. He also set fire not only to the city itself, but to all the villas and small cities that were round about it. Some of them were quite destitute of inhabitants, and out of some of them he carried the inhabitants as slaves into a captivity. So we'll see this repeated over and over again in Josephus, in his description of the war, that the Romans were essentially just destroying everything. It was like a scorched earth type of situation. He also says that Vespasian, therefore, in order to try how he might overcome the natural strength of the place, as well as the bold defense of the Jews, made a resolution to prosecute the siege with vigor. And so this is, obviously there's a spiritual fulfillment to Revelation, but this is actually a literal fulfillment here. He says, to that end, he called the commanders that were under him to a council of war, consulted with them which way the assault might be managed to the best advantage, And when the resolution was there taken to raise a bank against that part of the wall which was practicable, he sent his whole army abroad to get the materials together, so that they had cut down all the trees on the mountains that adjoined to the city, and had gotten together a vast heap of stones besides the wood they had cut down. Some of them brought hurdles in order to avoid the effects of the darts that were shot from above them. So, the Romans are cutting down the trees, destroying the vegetation, just like this Trumpet's curse is describing. And truly the very view itself of the country was a melancholy thing, for those places which were before adorned with trees and pleasant gardens were now become a desolate country in every way, and its trees were all cut down, nor could a foreigner that had formerly seen Judea as the most beautiful suburbs of the city, and now saw it as a desert, but lament and mourn sadly at so great a change, for the war had laid all the signs of beauty quite waste. Nor if anyone that had known the place before had come on a sudden to it now, would he have known it again. But though he were at the city itself, yet he would have inquired for it notwithstanding. So the change in the way that Judea looked, it was just completely destroyed, according to Josephus. And also there was actually some historical descriptions of raining blood even in Rome. In this book by Cassius Dio, the name of the book is Roman History, in book 63, chapter 26, it says, "One night Nero suddenly summoned in haste the foremost senators and knights, as if to make some communication to them regarding the political situation, then said to them," I quote his exact words, "I have discovered a way by which the water organ will produce louder, more musical tones." In such jest did he indulge even at this crisis, and little did he reck that both sets of doors, those of the mausoleum of Augustus and those of his own bedchamber, opened of their own accord on one and the same night, or that in the Alban territory it rained so much blood that rivers of it flowed over the land, or that the sea retreated a long distance from Egypt and covered a great portion of Lycia. So even in these Roman provinces, there was reports of literal blood raining down upon the earth. So all these prophecies or curses in the book of Revelation, they have a symbolic fulfillment, but then many of them also have a literal fulfillment at the same time. Revelation 8:8, "And the second messenger sounded, and what looked like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. And a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed." So, again, the sea becoming blood. We have this Egyptian plague of the river turning to blood. The mountain. A mountain in our apocalyptic language usually is a nation that's opposed to God. The term burning with fire means consumed by war. A ship would be a town. Then the water becoming blood would be the death of the nation. Living creatures, of course, would be the people in the sea, which would be the people themselves, literal people. So I remember someone at one point talking about the preterist view of the book of Revelation, the understanding that the book of Revelation is already fulfilled. And he said, well, unless you can show me where a literal mountain on fire was literally thrown into the ocean and the ocean became blood, I don't believe that it's been fulfilled. And it's like, as impossible as that sounds, that a mountain would actually be thrown into the water. I mean, probably a huge meteor would be the closest thing you could think of. But there's a number of times that Yahweh refers to a city or a country as a mountain. Jeremiah 51:24, "And I shall repay Babel and all the inhabitants of Chaldea for all the evil they have done in Zion before your eyes, declares Yahweh." See, I'm against you, O destroying mountain, who destroys all the earth, declares Yahweh, and I shall stretch out my hand against you, and I shall roll you down the rocks, and make you a burnt mountain. So here, Yahweh is speaking to Babylon, and he's calling Babylon a mountain, and he says, I'm going to make you a burnt mountain. It's the same description as we have in the book of Revelation. Jeremiah 17, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, engraved with the point of a diamond on the tablet of their heart, and on the horns of your altars, while their children remember their altars and their asherim by the spreading trees on the high hills. My mountain in the field I give as a plunder. Your wealth, all your treasures, your high places of sin throughout all your borders, and you, even yourself, shall let go of your inheritance which I gave you, and shall make you serve your enemies in a land which you have not known. For you have kindled a fire, my displeasure, which burns forever. So here you see Judah is being referred to as God's mountain. And then there's some other verses, Ezekiel 36, 1 through 5, and Ezekiel 6, 2 through 4, Daniel 2, 34 through 35, and 44 through 45. So all of these verses, you can look up the rest of them, but they all refer to a nation or a city as a mountain. So this is an example of where you can, find these apocalyptic terms. Like if God used mountain to represent city in the past, and in all these other instances, that's what he uses in prophecy to represent a city or a nation. It's not a literal mountain being thrown into the sea. Now, there is a literal fulfillment of the rest of the verse, though, where the ships are destroyed and the people on the ships are destroyed. Josephus, once again, in War of the Jews. Now, as those people of Joppa were floating about in the sea, and the sea he's talking about here is the Mediterranean, in the morning there fell a violent wind upon them. It is called by those that sail there the black north wind, and there dashed their ships one against another, and dashed some of them against the rocks, and carried many of them by force, while they strove against the opposite waves into the main sea. For the shore was so rocky, and had so many of the enemy upon it, that they were afraid to come to land. Nay, the waves rose so very high that they drowned them. Nor was there any place whither they could fly, nor any way to save themselves while they were thrust out of the sea by the violence of the wind, if they stayed where they were, and out of the city by the violence of the Romans. So basically the people were out there on the sea. They couldn't come to land because the Roman army was there ready to kill them. But then if they stayed out on the ocean or out on the sea, they would be destroyed by either smashing into the rocks or hitting the other ships. And much lamentation there was when the ships were dashed against one another, and a terrible noise when they were broken to pieces, and some of the multitude that were in them were covered with waves, and so perished, and a great many were embarrassed with shipwrecks. But some of them thought to die by their own swords was lighter than by the sea, and so they killed themselves before they were drowned, although the greatest part of them were carried by the waves, and dashed to pieces against the abrupt parts of the rocks, insomuch that the sea was bloody a long way, and the maritime parts were full of dead bodies. For the Romans came upon those that were carried to the shore, and destroyed them, and the number of the bodies that were thus thrown out to the sea was 4,200. The Romans also took the city without opposition, and utterly demolished it. And so that was the fate that befell Joppa. So, all of these different calamities that were called for in the book of Revelation, you see them also coming true on the earth. Revelation 8:10, and the third messenger sounded, and a great star fell from the heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and fountains of water, and the name of the star is called Wormwood. And a third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the waters because they were made bitter. So, a star falling from heaven in our apocalyptic language is consuming the thing by war, And rivers and waters, of course, are people. Now, one other thing I want to mention about this star is sometimes star is used as a reference to an angel. So it could be used as a reference to a city. Here in Isaiah 14:12, in the NASB version, of course, this is a speaking of Babylon. It says, "How you have fallen from the heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn! You have been cut down to the earth, you who were winged, weak in the nations." And so, depending on the translation, like the NASB, this is speaking to the nation of Babylon. But then in the New King James Version, it says, "How you are fallen from the heavens, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations." So is this reference to a star? Does this have something to do with an angel like Lucifer being thrown to earth, or does it have to do with a city being destroyed? And I don't know. I don't know what the proper interpretation is. There is this quote from Yeshua in Luke 10:18. He said to them, "I saw Satan falling out of heaven as lightning." Now, the commentaries I read, they seem to think that this is speaking about a nation, that the star being thrown to heaven is a nation. It's not an angelic being. So I'll leave that up to you, the listener, to decide. But I do want to take a moment to look at Wormwood. Deuteronomy 29:14. "And not with you alone am I making this covenant and this oath, but with him who stands here with us today before Yahweh Elohim, as well as he who is not here today with us. Lest there be among you a man or woman or clan or tribe whose heart turns away today from Yahweh our Elohim to go and serve the gods of these nations. Lest there should be among you a root bearing bitterness or wormwood." So wormwood is a bitter herb. And some of these translations translate it as being poisonous. But here you can see that here in Deuteronomy it is related to bitterness. Lamentations 3:15, "He has filled me with bitterness, he has drenched me with wormwood, and he has broken my teeth with gravel, he has covered me with ashes, and you have removed my being from peace. I have forgotten goodness, and I said, my strength and my expectancy have perished from before Yahweh. Remember my affliction and my anguish, the wormwood and the gall." So it's also equating affliction and anguish to wormwood and gall. Jeremiah 9:13, and Yahweh says, "Because they have forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, and have not obeyed my voice, nor walked according to it, but they have walked according to the stubbornness of their own heart, and after the Baals, which their fathers had taught them. Therefore, thus says Yahweh of hosts, the Elohim of Israel, see, I'm making this people eat wormwood, and I shall make them drink bitter, poisoned water." So these references, they're equating wormwood with bitterness, with poison, with misery, that sort of thing. Jeremiah 23, "Therefore thus says Yahweh of hosts concerning the prophets, see, I am making them eat wormwood, and shall make them drink bitter poison water, for defilement has gone out into all the land from the prophets of Jerusalem." Okay, so now we're looking at drinking poisoned water, and that's again what we see in the reference in the book of Revelation, is that this wormwood is making the waters bitter. Now, that should also call to mind Numbers 5:23, the law of the adulterous bride, where it says, so like if a man suspects his wife of adultery, he is to bring her before the priest, and the priest will make her drink this bitter water. And if she's guilty, her belly and her thigh will rot out, but if she's innocent, then no harm will come to her. So Numbers 5:23, "And the priest shall write these curses on a book, and shall wipe them off into the bitter water, and shall make the woman drink the bitter water that brings the curse. And the water that brings the curse shall enter her to become bitter." So I do think there is a tie-in with this to Judea, to the fact that they went after other gods, that they have not followed Yahweh with their whole heart, and now God is making them drink the bitter waters. And again, this has a literal fulfillment in the book of Josephus, where he says, "Now the lake of Gennesareth is so called from the country adjoining to it. Its breadth is 40 furlongs, and its length 140. Its waters are sweet and very agreeable for drinking, for they are finer than the thick waters of other fens. The lake is also pure, and on every side ends directly at the shores and at the sand. It is also of a temperate nature when you draw it up, and a more gentle nature than river or fountain of water, and yet always cooler than one could expect in so diffuse a place as this. And it is divided into two parts by the river Jordan." But now, when the vessels were gotten ready, Vespasian put upon shipboard as many of his forces as he thought sufficient to be too hard for those that were upon the lake. And so this is speaking about the same lake, Gennesareth, and set sail after them. The Romans ran many of them through with their long poles. Sometimes the Romans leaped into their ships with swords in their hands and slew them. But when some of them met the vessels, the Romans caught them by the middle and destroyed at once their ships and themselves who were taken in them. And for such as were drowning in the sea, if they lifted their heads above the water, they were either killed by darts or caught by the vessels. But if, in the desperate case they were in, they attempted to swim to their enemies, the Romans cut off either their heads or their hands, and indeed they were destroyed after various manner everywhere, till the rest, being put to flight, were forced to get upon the land, while the vessels encompassed them about on the sea. But as many of these were repulsed, when they were getting ashore, they were killed by the darts upon the lake, and the Romans leaped out of their vessels, and also destroyed a great many more upon the land. One might then see the lake all bloody and full of dead bodies, for not one of them escaped. And a terrible stink, and a very sad sight there was on the following days over that country. For as the shores, they were full of shipwrecks and of dead bodies, all swelled, and the dead bodies were inflamed by the sun and putrefied. They corrupted the air insomuch that the misery was not only the object of commiseration to the Jews, but those that hated them, and they had been the authors of all that misery. This was the upshoot of the sea fight. The number of the slain, including those that were killed in the city before, was 6,500. So there was a slaughter at this lake, and of course this lake then flowed into the Jordan River, and we'll see in a moment that now the Jordan River is full of dead bodies, and of course the water is now obviously bitter. Also going back to the law of the adulterous bride, it was to make their belly swell and their thigh rot out, and so now you have these dead bodies all swollen in this lake that was previously sweet water, but now it's been made bitter. So it's kind of like this star falling from heaven could almost be seen like an anti-Moses, because there was an episode in the Torah where Moses threw these palm branches into a body of water, and it made the bitter water sweet. Well, now the sweet water is being made bitter, so it could be almost seen as like an anti-Moses, like I said. Now, this destruction that fell upon the Jews, as it was not inferior to any of the rest in itself, so did it still appear greater than it really was. And this, because not only the whole country through which they fled was filled with slaughter, and Jordan could not be passed over by reason of the dead bodies that were in it, but because of the lake Asphaltis was also full of dead bodies. That's the Dead Sea. They were carried down into it by the river. So this slaughter that occurred on Lake Gennesareth is now also polluted the Jordan, and there's even dead bodies in the Dead Sea. Revelation 8:12. And the fourth messenger sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. And a third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. So the sun, moon, the stars, these of course represent, according to our apocalyptic terminology, they represent different leaders. The sun would be like the king, the moon would be the queen, or could represent the people, and then the stars would be like the lesser rulers. And of course, being darkened could mean that they were removed from power, they were overthrown. It could mean they were killed. Both the commentaries that I'm reading from, they both quoted this particular person, F.W. Farrar, in his book, The Early Days of Christianity, Volume 2, where he says, ruler after ruler, chieftain after chieftain of the Roman Empire and Jewish nation were assassinated and ruined. Gaius, Claudius, Nero, Galba, Otho, Vatinius, all died by murder or suicide. Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, Herod Agrippa, and most of the Herodian princes, together with not a few of the leading high priests of Jerusalem, perished from disgrace, or in exile, or by violent hands. All these were quenched suns and darkened stars. So that's about the most accurate quote that you could get. I mean, it's I know we've read previous quotes and references to these princes and persons being overthrown, but I think this is just a good summation for that verse. And finally, Revelation 8:13, I looked and I heard an eagle flying in mid-heaven, crying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to those dwelling upon the earth, because of the remaining blast of the trumpet and the three messengers that are about to sound. And so that's the conclusion of Revelation 8. Just a little commentary on the eagle. The eagle, of course, was the symbol of the Roman army. They had eagles on all of their standards, and so Deuteronomy 28:49 says, Yahweh brings a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flies, a nation whose language you shall not understand, a fierce-looking nation, which shows no regard for the elderly, nor shows favor for the young. And they shall eat the fruit of your livestock and the fruit of your land until you are destroyed. They leave you no grain, nor new wine, nor oil, nor the increase of your cattle, or the offspring of your flocks, until they have destroyed you. And if you really want to summarize Revelation chapter 8, I think this passage from Deuteronomy does it. Because everything that he is saying in this passage come true. Perfectly describes the Romans. They show no favor to the young or the old. They'll eat up your livestock and your fruit until you're destroyed. And that's what happened. So that's the end of chapter 8, and I'll get working on chapter 9, have it put up as soon as possible. Thanks for listening. Shalom.